Hi, this is Anita from the Dusty Roads podcast. Today, I want to talk a little bit about why, when you travel, understanding the local culture is so important. I was telling someone the other day about I was flying on a United flight, and a flight attendant sat next to me. I said to her, she said, "Where do you live?" I said, "Oh, I live in China." At the time, I was living in China. And she said, "Oh, do you speak Japanese?" And I said, "No, I live in China, not Japan." So I think it's really important that when you're traveling or if you're in the travel industry, you need to understand a little bit about the world and people in the world. So first of all, let's talk about something which is called cultural literacy. And why does it matter? What is cultural literacy? Cultural literacy is the ability to understand and respect the norms, values, behaviors, and customs of other cultures. It's not just about learning about what to do or not do. It's about knowing why those things matter to the people who live there. So let me repeat that again, because I feel like this is really an important definition to understand. That is not just about saying I understand the history. It's about understanding why the norms, values, behaviors, and customs of other cultures are important to them and the people who live in those places. Why is that important to them? When you understand these cultural cues, you avoid being the clueless outsider or become someone who you can become someone who's then truly engaged with the world. Part of my blog, A Bus on a Dusty Road, and this Dusty Roads podcast is all about living your life as a global citizen. And that's one of the things that I really am an advocate for, is basically, let's live our life as a global citizen. Let's try to embrace and understand other cultures, but not just, embrace and understand, but really understand what makes these other cultures tick. Why are they the way that they are? And so we have a cultural understanding of the world. As I've said many times in this podcast, or I've said many times, is that it's not a matter of that you have to really travel to those places, but if you can just start with wanting to understand, people that from other cultures in your own neighborhood, that right there is a start. In practical terms, cultural literacy helps you to avoid offending, local people if you're traveling. It can build real connections with people. You can experience places more authentically. You'll really see an authentic side of this part of the world. And you can navigate social situations with confidence. Without this cultural literacy, you're just a tourist. But with it, you're a traveler who gets it. And I really love that thought that, without it, you're just a tourist, just an everyday tourist. You're just somebody else who's touring. But when you begin to understand cultural literacy, you're a traveler who really gets it, who gets and understands the travel. In Asia, relationships, respect, and rituals are all very important. Many Asian cultures value relationships and social harmony. In countries like China, Japan, South Korea, the concept of face is very important to a person's reputation and social standing. That, this can play a huge role in daily interactions. You don't want someone to be able to lose face. They want to be able to keep their face. This will help maintain harmony. Take a typical dinner in Asia. If you're invited to someone's home in China or Vietnam, it's not just about feeding you. It's about showing respect, care, and generosity. Your host might insist you try every single dish. Saying "I'm full" may not be accepted the first time. They want to make sure that you're happy, that you're being taken care of. To Western travel, this could feel a bit pushy, like, I don't want to try everything that they're giving me, or I don't really like that. But to them, this is showing a gesture of deep hospitality. And in fact, when you go into some places some of these places you may actually find, even if you're in a factory where you're eating and the factory, starts putting food on your plate, or they start, trying to force you to almost force feed you. This for them is a way for them to show how much they appreciate that you are there. In Thailand, cultural respect extends to daily body language. The head's considered the most sacred part of the body. So you don't touch someone's head, even playfully, is considered disrespectful. Likewise, the feet are considered very lowly and dirty. So pointing your feet at someone, especially a Buddha statue or a monk, is considered to be very rude. In Japan, bowing is not just a greeting, it's a layered form of communication with different meanings depending on the depth and duration. So if you've ever watched like Japanese movies or Japanese films, you may see them bowing quite a bit. And that all is very much part of the cultural signs of respect. Europe, and one of the problems that a lot of Americans have is they don't tone it down and just listen more. That's why, if you talk to a lot of your European friends, they might consider, some Americans to be loudmouthed and, big mouthed because they feel like, Americans just don't get it. Where for Europe, it's really about more like, you don't have this huge volume, of public behavior. In the U.S., being friendly can mean being enthusiastically chatty and loud. In fact, a lot of my European friends say, oh, Americans talk to everybody. And in Europe, they may not. Public spaces are for quieter, more reserved behavior. Talking loudly or really loudly in a public space or transport or cafe can draw annoyed stares. They may, people may not like that. They believe that it should be more of a quiet and, people should have some more decorum about them. Personal space can be a big thing in Northern Europe. Standing too close to someone or jumping in a conversation. I actually have a little bit of a harder time with this, especially here in Asia where, there could be no personal space, especially like when I'm getting on an airplane and, I've got somebody behind me who's just right at my heel. It just annoys me to no end. I just feel like, just don't push me, And, I think maybe that could be my Northern European, sort of thinking or upbringing that I've had here. In Southern Europe, like Spain or Italy, conversations may be more animated and physical touches or pat on the shoulder or on the cheek could be common. Also, some European countries, people value understatement and so it really depends. Like even within Europe itself, not everything is the same throughout all Europe. The Middle East, too, is another place where, cultures and hospitality is a nicety. It's a core value. Guests are treated with immense respect. Refusing food or drink too quickly can seem impolite. Taking time to share tea and engage in conversation can be a way of building trust. And this can be really hard for especially for, those of us that are raised maybe, in American, we may be impatient. We may sit there and say, why do we have to sit here and, drink the tea or other things? We want to get right to the point of the conversation where, in a lot of these other cultures, it's all about the pace of life. It's about the slowness of it all. It's about maybe getting to know you a little bit, building the trust before you start in on type of conversation. Modesty in dress and behavior can also be important, especially for women. And, it's not just about policing behavior. It can be aligning with the local expectations and showing cultural awareness. Latin America can be very different. There can be warmth, time and flexibility. In countries like Latin America, social warmth is a norm. Expect hugs, kisses on your cheek. They can be very close to you during conversation. Declining some of these gestures come off as cold or unfriendly. Time can be perceived a little bit differently. Late doesn't always mean the same thing. A dinner invitation at 7 p.m. may not start until 8:30. If you're too rigid or impatient, it could cause friction. You need to understand that there can be some rhythms that are taking place. Africa has a great community and respect for elders. Africa as a continent is extremely diverse, but values and respect for elders are common threads across many cultures on the continent. In places like Ghana or Kenya, greeting everyone when entering a room or public space is customary. Skipping greetings can be seen as rude. Elders are often treated with deference. Speaking to older individuals requires politeness and sometimes a more formal tone. So you need to really understand these things if you're going into Africa. You might ask, well, why does all this matter? Why should it matter if I just want to travel? Well, it goes back to what I said at the beginning. Having cultural literacy is the difference between being just a tourist or being a traveler who actually gets it, who understands it, who understands all of these differences. I've written a blog post on this that, has some tips about this too. If you're going to be traveling, some different things that you can do to make sure that you're not just a tourist, but you're a traveler who actually gets it and understands it, that you're a traveler that travels with cultural literacy. And we'll put a description below into the blog post, which is entitled, Why Understanding Local Culture is a Secret to Meaningful Travel. We hope that when you travel that you will try to be a traveler who gets it and not just be a tourist, but someone who actually gets it and understands it. That you will be someone who strives to live your life as a global citizen. This is Anita from the Dusty Road Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We hope that you'll join with us to live your life as a global citizen, that you'll subscribe to that podcast and be part of our community. Thank you.